This meeting is now being recorded.
I do have a camera next to my name, but I don't need to be seen. I'm not even sure what my hair looks like this morning. So.
Okay, let's just go with audio.
Thank you. I just see some participants video-wise, so.
Am I in control?
Yeah.
You're always in control, Dave.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I see Anne Frankel. He's muted. Bruno Teixeira.
So Dave, there's an echo. There's an echo. We can hear you through the. Yeah.
I hear an echo too, but I don't think I'm causing it.
All right.
Bruno, I see your message. I don't hear you. Okay. Hello.
Hey there, Dave. It's Karen.
Okay. I think we should start. But I'm concerned that we can't hear other people. Is there anyone else on? So I've heard Nan Rothrock and Karen Cook, and this is Dave Sella, and we're the experts in the room, as it were. Is there anyone else that can speak up so we know that we have audio?
This is Shannon Golden.
Great.
This is Teresa Bryan. I just have you on mute.
Okay. Good. That's Shannon and Teresa.
This is Maria Varela. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, I'm Jason Guattari. I have audio as well.
Hi, Jason.
If anyone's having trouble audio through their computer, I've had trouble in the past. You might choose to just use the call-in number.
Anyone besides Shannon, Teresa, and was it Jason? If you've tried to speak, I didn't hear you. So try the dial-in number or unmute. Sometimes you need to both unmute your computer as well as unmute on the web, on the screen.
Can everyone
Hi,
hear me now?
Yeah, who's that?
This is Jason.
Yeah. We hear you, Jason. Julie, it looks like Bruno cannot hear us. I'm reading this.
All right, so we can hear him over the phone.
Hi, who just called? Who just joined?
This is Dr. Fon at the VA, Phoenix VA.
Hi, what was your name again?
Phan.
Oh, okay.
And Dave, this is Rajiv Malik.
Good. Hi, Rajiv. How are you?
Anne Frankel.
Thanks. All right. There's Anne Frankel and Rajiv. We're making progress. Well, along the way, Karen, you want me to go through the slides along the way? If those of you who have not been able to announce yourselves can try calling in on on the call-in number? What's that call-in number?
Yeah, if you would, Dave, and just announce to everybody that we are recording, so be aware of that, and the recording will be available on the website, so you'll have an opportunity if there's something you want to review.
All right. So announced. Phone number. We need a phone number.
719.
This is the number to call. If you haven't been able to be heard through your computer and you can't turn off all of your mute functions, try calling into 719-234-7872. And the guest passcode is 613593. Pound. Okay. And Bruno can hear us.
If we can't hear you, you can post a question in the public chat section of the interface you're looking at.
And Karen has just put the phone number and code in there in case you didn't have time to write it down. Let's get started. So we received some questions in advance. We'll start with those, and if there's time, we'll take other questions. The first one is for manual data collection. For outcomes having done the CATs, how many decimal places and standard deviation units, I suppose, does one collect? Well, I think that's, I don't know who asked the question, but I think that's asking for our recommendation of what's needed, and my view is that any more than 2 or at most 3 decimal places is not very useful. I think the system can probably collect any number of decimal places out. But I would personally go with 2. Others? Oh, okay. So in terms of what's clinically significant, there are now a couple of papers published on this. The first one was published by Kathy Yost and colleagues, and another by Roxanne Jensen and colleagues, and there may be others. But Karen, you may have been involved in one as well. Please speak up if you have. But generally, the T-score that tends to be clinically meaningful is in the 3 to 5 point range. And it does change, a little bit, but not never too much outside of that range. And there's a difference. I guess I would also make 2 distinctions. One is there's group comparison clinical significance, and there's individual score clinical significance. The latter of which you want a much larger number to be confident that it's a meaningful change. Whether it's clinically meaningful or not is a somewhat different question, but if you're talking about group comparisons, a smaller number in a range, like 3 is probably meaningful, and if it's an individual change, it's probably a larger number, more
Dave,
like
you're
5.
cutting out quite a bit, just so you know. Maybe we could all put our phones on mute unless we're speaking.
Okay. I can hear myself fine. That was a joke. I can't hear anybody laughing, though. All right. So I don't know if I should repeat that or not, but generally 3 to 5 points, smaller numbers for group comparisons, larger numbers for individual comparisons, there's also a distinction I think people should keep in mind between a difference between groups as opposed to a change over time. Those are not always the same.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to add that there are many ways to calculate a clinically significant amount. So it should be kept in mind that these are estimates, and so when you have multiple ways of calculating it, you can create a range in which you have some confidence. But it's very important to remember this is not a a quote true value that we discover, but rather it's a range that we estimate because it's useful to do so.
The third question on this panel, on this slide, is relates to different modes of administration as well as different types of assessments. So if you have a cat using tablets and then others using a paper form, which presumably would not be a cat, the question is, do these results relate to one another? Can they be pooled? And so far from the evidence we have, the answer is yes. That whether you use a cat or a fixed form, the score is expressed in the same metric, and also whether you administer it by tablet versus paper, the difference between groups in a study that's published by Jacob Bjorner and colleagues, we can put the reference on the site on the website with a posting, showed that across the three domains studied, depression, fatigue, and physical function, there were no significant differences between groups when people were randomly assigned to either tablet or paper assessment. They also studied telephone administration and handheld device and computer. So none of these were different from the others. So far the news is pretty encouraging that you can indeed use these different modes and express everything on the same common metric. Having said that, it's always good practice to try to minimize the mixing of different methods, because in any given application you never really know. But as I say, so far the evidence we have is encouraging that you can do that. Anyone else want to add to that, or should we go to the next slide? Are there any questions? Oh, Jennifer Riggs is asking, by phone do you mean IVR or phone by data collector? So the study that I referred to, Jennifer, was IVR. When you have a data collector on the phone doing an interview, we did not study that, but there is a literature, as you probably know, that interview administered patient-reported outcomes tend to produce better scores than self-administration without an interviewer, and that's whether it's a phone interview or a face-to-face interviewer. So would caution people against mixing and matching personal interview collected data with the others. And I'm sorry if I'm still breaking up or coming in and out. I don't know what to do about that. I could try calling back if people think that would help.
Dave, are you going through the computer or are you on the phone line?
I'm on a landline with the handset in my hand.
Surprised.
Yeah. It may be just.
Is anybody having trouble hearing me? Am I breaking up the way Dave does? If somebody, you can just type in your answer.
I can hear you both fine, actually.
Okay. Well, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just my Texas ears. Things break up a little bit.
Well, you've always had some trouble hearing me, Karen.
I just have trouble hearing. Okay.
Karen and I are good friends, so we tease one another. It's just Ann can hear us fine, Shannon can hear us fine, Teresa can hear us fine. So it sounds like everyone else that's chiming in can hear us just fine, Karen.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be quiet then, and I'll just, because I know you so well, I can just fill in the missing words.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's move on. I don't hear any other questions from people, so I think it's better for us to try to move through these questions. What are your thoughts on clinician administration of PROMIS surveys to frail older adults, home health care patient population, who are not able to independently complete the survey? Well, I'll start, but there are others on the call that may want to offer opinions. It does add a layer of difficulty and challenge. There are not so much in the PROMIS panel of offerings, but on the adult side, but on NeuroQual, which is a sister companion to Promise, there are proxy forms for many of the assessments that can be done by a relative, family member, or close associate of the patient filling out on their behalf. And of course, it's also available in Promise Pediatrics. But in general, you have to make, the first choice you have to make is, is the person able to provide answers for himself or herself that are reliable? And if that's true, it's better to get them from the person in some sort of assisted way, interview or using some type of assistance, or perhaps allowing for extra time or explanation of questions. If the person's not able to provide reliable information, then I would turn to a proxy. The mixing of proxy and self-administration is still not easy. If possible, you could administer to both patient and proxy, and then use that association over time to estimate the patient scores from the proxy report. If patients reach a point, perhaps in the beginning of a study they can independently report, but later they can't, then you can use the proxy report and the relationship between proxy and patient from earlier to estimate what the patient score would likely be based upon the proxy score. That's about the best approach I can think of to deal with this challenging situation. But in general, I would get it in terms of if the question is it better to have some data or none, I would say yes, definitely get it. And if it has to be the clinician administering it, that's fine, but just be aware that the clinician is perhaps not biased at all and objective, but that doesn't mean that the respondent treats the clinician as an unbiased administrator. They may shape their answers based upon what they want the clinician to hear for other reasons than just a truthful rendering of their current state. I don't see any other questions. Does anyone want to add something to that? All right. Maria, can you provide, this is Maria Varela announced herself earlier, can you provide an update on mobile apps for Promise? And then Nan and Maria, if you know any information about people collecting Promise data without a provider interface?
Hi, so this is Maria. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, good. So there is the so-called NIH Toolbox Promise app that can be found in the App Store, the Apple App Store. Is what we call a clinician app, or it relies on somebody to administer the measures. It contains the top Promise measures, and we are in the process of adding a second wave and then a third wave of Promise measures to it. That's
Any follow-up?
basically
Any follow-up from Nan or from anyone in the chat?
So the question about collecting Promise data without a provider interface, most Promise data is collected without a provider interface. It's collected through paper forms, REDCap, assessment center, self-reports, modalities, either through a computer, a tablet, or paper. It's pretty rare there's actually a provider interface.
All right. Next question. Good question. I'm new to this. Could someone? Yeah, sure.
There's a question on the chat about the app. Is it just on Apple, or is there an Android-based application as well?
Go ahead.
So for the moment, it is a native Apple app. It will only work on Apple devices. It actually only works in an iPad because the screen size is tailored to an iPad.
And to my knowledge, none of us has any stock in Apple, so in case anyone's wondering. Okay. Question 4. I'm new to this. Could someone please give an overview and explanation how new members become involved in projects, access to data, etc.? How do members develop ideas for Promise collaboration? So I'll say a little bit, but then I would like to ask Karen and Nan to chime in. The new members can become involved in projects by participating in through the website in interest groups, and Nan will ask Nan to say more about that. There's not just the PHO website, but also the Health Measures website. There is access that's easy to get from the Wave 1 Promise study, and there'll be several Wave 2 projects data that will become available for anyone to request and download and analyze, so that you can reanalyze data that have previously been analyzed and published by Promise investigators. Those data, some are already available, and more will be coming available over the coming months. And developing ideas for Promise collaboration, I would encourage you to, keep tuning into the websites. That's both the PHO website and the Health Measures website, and the URLs will be on what we summarize after this call, and also come to the Promise and PHO workshops and conference. The next large conference will be in Copenhagen in October of 2016, but there'll be a workshop in Chicago. Nan, maybe you can get the exact dates, but I think it's June 2nd or something like that here in Chicago.
June 1st and 2nd.
So there's a slide at the end as well. So Nan, could you say a little bit more about the Health Measures site and how people can engage with others around collaborations? And then Karen, I'm sure you have some things you'd like to add.
Sure. So the healthmeasures.net website is a great resource for connecting with other researchers or clinicians using Promise. There is a forum that you can participate in by simply creating a username and password, and it allows for posting questions, answering questions, and having direct communication with others using Promise or interested in Promise. Am I hearing
Someone's getting a call.
Ring?
Yeah, someone's getting a call. I don't know.
Okay. And then the user workshop that Dave mentioned is June 1st and 2nd, close to O'Hare in Chicago. The first day is a half-day intro workshop that will provide some basic information about Promise as well as other measurement systems. And then the second day has a series of workshops on various topics. And you can learn more about that from the healthmeasures.net website. There's a page on upcoming workshops, and I will post that in the chat.
And I'll add a couple of things based on from the Promise Health Organization perspective. Of course, we're a new group, and we seem to have hit the ground running. We've got a lot of people who have joined. We're approaching our 100. We're approaching 100. I guess we're approaching 1,000 as well. But whatever. I just want to make the point that this is really excellent times for people to get involved and to shape the organization for your own needs. So if you have ideas, that using the information that Nan put there is a really great way to do it. You can always contact me, and we can float ideas to the rest of the network. We've just now kind of officially started the international work group. There's been some talk about the possibility of having a clinical use group. There may be other things that you're interested in, and I guess my bottom line is don't be shy. Feel free to come in and roll your sleeves up and help us make it an organization that works for your needs.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. This is it's an open organization. We've just, it's the PHO. That's the organization putting on this WebEx. Is a 501c3, nonprofit charity, and in the U.S. that's a reference to a sort of a tax deductible organization, and not, depending on growing a membership that is enthusiastic and wants to help build community. And our growth rate is pretty fast right now because we just recently opened up the organization to anyone who wishes to join for a reasonable amount, which I think is $100. Is that right? Annual.
That's right.
So please join if you're on the call and haven't joined, and those of you who have joined, you can get involved by letting us know who you are and asking what you are, telling us what you're interested in, asking what you can do to help. There were
By
some.
the way, some of you paid $35 to attend today, and we'll have these very, very regularly, and very quickly. It's worth your money to. It sounds like I feel like I'm on the Home Shopping Network. It's really worth your money to go ahead and be part of the organization.
Yeah. I'm just thumbing through some answers to some questions. Thank you, Nan, for typing in the answers. But just to review them for those that aren't looking at the public chat, there's a question about whether you need to sort of join Health Measures to use Promise. And Health Measures is a website that we're running. It doesn't require, we're right here at Northwestern, it doesn't require you to join anything. You can download Promise tools from the site. So please go there and read about it. It's an easy to navigate site and easy to download things for your use. So have at it. And then Jennifer Riggs asked to talk more specifically about studies with elderly, and Nan, actually, your post was more about the Data to Health Measures workshop, June 1st to 2nd. So in terms of more about studies with older patients, there are a lot of studies that we and others working with us have done with older people, but they're not necessarily labeled as studies with older people. So, for example, Jim Fries and the Stanford group studied arthritis, and that involved, mostly people, certainly over 60 and many into their 70s and 80s. We did several cancer studies, which just based upon the demographics of cancer, you can imagine the average age is around 60 and age range runs up to 90. And so we have, in these various disease, and there's a heart failure study, which is similar, and COPD. So we have a lot of experience with older populations and older impaired sick populations with these illnesses, cancer, COPD, arthritis, heart failure, etc. We've looked at things like whether people respond differently to questions because of their age, and the answer is almost always no, that we don't see much evidence at all of age-related differential item function. We've looked to see if we're missing something that's important for older, more important for older people than younger, and tend to migrate more toward, needing to be sure that when we ask about things like physical function, we're also including assistive devices and getting a measure of physical function with assistance versus without assistance, and focusing more on independence as a valued aspect of health-related quality of life. So there are some content-related issues that are just more salient, more relevant to older patients, and we try to cover those with the existing general Promise banks, but making extensions of them that address things like independence and assistive devices and the like. Okay. There's a note here from Nan also saying, to remind you, you can find publications and search for older on the Health Measures website. I don't know if everyone's able to read the public chat. I don't know if I should read these back or if it's obvious. If somebody could tell me if they're showing up on your screen, then I don't need to read all of them.
I can't see it.
Jennifer can see it. Okay. and Shannon can see it. So good. So if people can see it, I won't make a point of making sure I read everything. Just be sure to keep your eyes down there in the lower left for comments that others on the call might make. Okay, should we move on? I want to see how this tool could be useful to better capture the issues surrounding adolescent girls and women with bleeding disorders and heavy menstrual bleeding. I don't have any specific information on this particular population. There is a pretty extensive range of PROMIS measures for children and adolescents. I think if you search the domains that PROMIS covers, you'll find some of these things, some of the domains that are relevant, but I think you'll also note that there are some things you might want to add to your assessment to be able to better capture either cyclical variability in functioning or well-being that that are related to bleeding disorders and heavy menstrual bleeding. I think one thing that comes to mind, Nan, maybe, or Karen, maybe you remember more about this, but Arthur Stone did a study where he looked at daily assessment versus weekly assessment across the menstrual cycle to see if the weekly averaging of things like depression, anxiety, fatigue was well captured, mood and other aspects that might vary a lot from day to day based upon a menstrual cycle. And I'm not sure if that's published. Yeah.
It is published. In fact, I'll find it and post it while you're talking.
So I would maybe start there, but this is certainly an area where you could build on the knowledge base. Thanks for tracking it down, Karen.
You bet.
Okay, next question. Do you have any guidance on what a clinically meaningful change is for any domain, and are these differences age-related? Well, I already commented on this before, but just to repeat, it tends to land in the 3 to 5 point range, and I didn't mention this earlier, probably should have. 3 to 5 T-score units is around 1/3 to 1/2 a standard deviation unit, based upon the structure of a T-score with a mean of 50 and standard deviation of 10. So when it's been studied, it tends to fall in that 3 to 5 point range. This is an area where there's a lot of research that can and should be done going forward. But so far, in the few studies that we have, it's been falling in that range. And something closer to 3 points makes sense for group comparisons, and something closer to 5 points makes sense for individual change. And whether or not the differences are age-related, I don't know. I'm not sure that anyone's looked at that. So this is a question for you to perhaps ask in your own research. Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, so research applications of PROMIS item bank scores. Oh, I see the citation. That was quick, Karen. The research applications of PROMIS item banks. Sorry, you wanted to say something, Karen?
No, thanks.
Okay. Research applications of PROMIS item bank scores are clear. However, as a clinical tool at the patient visit, does the NIH have a specific vision regarding the use of PROMIS item bank scores by clinicians? I would say that, as opposed to whether it's the NIH having this vision, I can't speak for the NIH. They're obviously very interested in the long-term success and use of PROMIS because of the investment they made in PROMIS. But speaking from the PHO and on behalf of investigators in PROMIS, I can say that although we built the PROMIS item banks, to be sure to work in clinical research, which is to say, if they could do nothing else, we wanted to make sure that they would be good clinical research tools as outcome measures. But all along the way, really from the very beginning, we wanted to design them in such a way that they also had the potential for clinical value. And in fact, several groups have been using the PROMIS tools clinically in a variety of settings and have been publishing on the use of PROMIS clinically. The one that's, I'll just speak for the one that's closest to my heart is the cancer publication by Lynn Wagner and colleagues in the journal Cancer, 2014, just last year, on the use of, it may even was this year, I can't remember now, 14 or 15, on the use of PROMIS cats as screening tools for pain, fatigue, depression, and anxiety in cancer ambulatory care. And we had developed in preparation for that work, using a standard setting, a bookmarking standard setting methodology, had identified in clinical thresholds for guideline-driven clinical activity based upon scores on PROMIS in the cancer ambulatory setting. There are others doing similar work, and I think having great success with it. The other area, which is partly as a clinical tool but also as a performance measure of clinical practice, is that we're seeing increasing use of PROMIS tools for performance measurement in negotiating with payers for orthopedic procedures, for heart failure care, and management of complex chronic conditions where disease-specific instruments don't work very well because, by definition, you're managing more than one condition at a time, and you need to have these, sort of PROMIS-like generic cross-cutting measures to apply. I see a question down here. Can you talk about how T-scores are made? How does that relate to the Andrich probability equation? Well, a T-score is nothing more than a transformed score from the logit, from the mean 0 standard deviation 1 logit score, then transformed up to a mean of 50 standard deviation of 10, and that's a simple linear transformation. I'm not sure how it relates to Andrich probability equation because I don't know what the Andrich probability equation is. I'm sorry, Karen may know that. Don't mean to put you on the spot, Karen, but it is a log. It is a, yeah. Go ahead.
So regardless of what IRT model or Roche model you use, you will wind up with scores on a log odds metric. So you'll have logits, and then the step to T-scores is just instead of let's say you calibrated where the metric is centered at 0 for items, or for for people, then 50 would represent the average of people on a T-score metric, and the standard deviation would be 10. Whereas usually what you have when you have a logit metric that's also centered on the population is a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. So the step, regardless of what model is used to the T-score equation, is just a linear transformation.
Okay. I believe that's the last slide. I think the next slide is the announcement or reminder of this Health Measures user workshop that we're holding here in Chicago, actually near the airport in Rosemont, so it's kind of an easy in and out and a relatively quick and interesting train ride into the city. So these are the dates. Please consider coming. It'll be an opportunity for interaction, for much more exposure to not just PROMIS, but other tools that we have available, like NeuroQual, which is a neurology analog to PROMIS, if you will, that links to PROMIS and shares some item content. Ask Me, which is a sickle cell disease, adult sickle cell disease system, and the NIH Toolbox. So we'll be covering all of that in this 2-day workshop. And you can also come and present your work at a poster reception or perhaps even at the podium. So we have some time. I'm going to keep this on the screen. We have some time left for, there may be follow-up questions to some of the things we talked about, or there may be new questions from some of you. So please feel free to either type them in or announce yourself and ask them on the phone.
There's a great question that's posted about preferences about scoring. And so in Scoring Promise data, you have two options. You can use the Assessment Center scoring service, which is a free online service where you upload an Excel file of raw responses and it will email you a scored file. Or you can use manual scoring by finding the appropriate scoring manual, creating a summed score, and then using a lookup table. We generally recommend using the Assessment Center scoring service when you can. It allows to have more accurate scores when you have missing data. And Dave, I don't know if you want to say anything else about advantages of its use of response pattern scoring.
Well, yeah, I mean, another way to put that is that the response pattern scoring is always the best. It's not always practical. And the reason the response pattern scoring is always the best is that if you, and we're only talking here about when there's missing responses. So if somebody answers all the questions you've given them on a short form, then looking up the score works fine. But if they haven't answered all the questions, because of the use of IRT, and it's not all questions are equal, so a score of 3 on one question doesn't have the same value as a score of 3 on another if those two questions are asking about different severity levels of whatever you're measuring. So the pattern scoring is always better because it will take into account which item is missing, not just that any item is missing, whereas the lookup table really does just a prorating and assumes that all items are equal in terms of how a raw score translates. So it's a less than optimal approach, but it usually is so close to the pattern scoring that we, I guess you could say, allow it because people can't always do the pattern scoring. And then go ahead.
I was just going to read the second question. This person has been validating the peer relationship item bank for pediatric respondents and would like to know which procedure to adopt when CFA doesn't present unidimensionality and an excessive local dependence between items.
Boy, I got on just in time, didn't I?
So this is, but I'm a little. You can take it, Karen, but I'm a little confused.
Go ahead.
This is somebody in their own data on peer relationships has done a CFA on their raw data and find that it's not unidimensional, that there's local dependence in their particular data. Is that the issue?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Well, I don't know, Bruno, if this is in English or a different language. That maybe I'm just wondering if we are talking about English to English. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to recommend an article, and self-servingly, it's one that I'm author of. So CFA statistics in the context of item banks frequently can be misleading. So the real question, the reason we do CFA is to establish whether a bank is unidimensional. But our real question is whether, because there's always some multidimensionality. So our real question is there so much multidimensionality that it disturbs our estimate of parameters? So there's some nice ways to do that. Rather, since you have not invited me to do tutorial on that right now, I'm going to post a couple of articles that you might want to look at.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Rajiv Malik, who's following up on his question about pattern scoring and lookup tables, saying if you expect the scoring to have followed a Gutman pattern, meaning even with missing items, you would expect those who score high on difficult items also have scored high on easier items. Well, I'm going to say a couple things. One is that these aren't quite Gutman scales. I mean, they're Gutman-like, but they're not fully Gutman scales. And so there's, that's one issue. The other is that the lookup table, the prorating doesn't take into account which items were skipped. So you may have skipped the most difficult item, or someone may have skipped the easiest item, or they may have skipped something in the middle. So even if it was a Gutman pattern, you still would have the slight imperfection of treating all items equally when you're rolling up a raw score, prorating it, and then looking it up. But as I said, it's not the error is not very large at all. So that's why we produce them, because it does help a lot of users to be able to, proceed. Karen, do you want to add anything to that, or do you disagree?
No, I was just going to send the links to some YouTube videos for learning about IRT.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Jason is asking thoughts on whether there's a need to renorm the scores for different populations like professional athletes. Well, there's a this is a very deep question. I mean, it's a complex it's a complex question. It may not seem like it on the surface, but I mean, in the case of professional athletes, let's assume you're talking about physical function. One of the points about the physical function item bank is that it, as it exists today in use, stops being very effective at differentiating people any more than a standard deviation above the average. So up in T-scores above 60, it doesn't do a terribly good job differentiating people. And so, the short answer would be, it's not so much that we need to renorm for professional athletes, but we need new and more questions if that's the goal, is to be able to work with that particular population. But the broader issue raised by this that I want to raise is, and this has come up a lot with our international collaborations. There's a question about the T-score itself being referenced to the U.S. general population, which is the case, and that's pretty clearly the case. But as this gets applied in England and the Netherlands and Germany and elsewhere in the world, there's interest in those countries in having country-specific norms, which is a similar issue. And while that's understandable and a good idea, we've been recommending from the PHO that people not reset the 50, that they use the same metric and the same score, but perhaps then have norms for a country that might be above or below that 50 line for a given language, for example. So in the going back to the professional athlete example, that might mean that if you're being normed against professional athletes, your midpoint, your average might be something like 60 or 62 or something like that, and that just becomes your centered norm. But it does. We wouldn't change that number to 50.
Yeah,
that would be too confusing.
Sorry, Dave. I was just going to pounce on this one because it's kind of I think it's a really important issue, and part of it is that people confuse the metric and with the idea of norms, and it's easy to do because in our case we anchored the metric on a particular set of norms, right, the U.S. general population. But once you have the metrics, so you have your set of scores, their center is 50, standard deviation is 10, you can create as many norm tables as you've got data for. So you can find out, if you have enough data, you can find out the average score for African-American women who are between 32 and 35, right? You can, obviously that would be that helpful, but you might want age ranges, norms. You might want to know what's the average for a 35-year-old woman, or between 30 and 40. And in fact, in some of our work, we actually did that, pulling out the average U.S. norms for gender, by age range, etc. So once you have your metric set, you don't want to mess with that. There's tons of confusion that patterns. But your opportunity to create tables that show what the norms are for different relevant subpopulations is just pretty endless, and really encourage people to do that by gathering enough data to make that a viable solution. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions about that? There's a distinction between having a metric that stays where it is and having a lot of tables that show you what the average is for subpopulations. All right.
Okay. Jason's happy. So we have about 7 minutes or so. If there are any other questions, we're happy to entertain them, or you don't have to type them out. It seems to be easiest for most people. If anyone wants to speak up or just have anything to say, it doesn't have to be a question. Please feel free.
Hi, this is Teresa Bryan from Savannah High Medical Center. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. I'm sorry. I know this is a real elementary question compared to everybody else that's on this phone call, but we're just starting to want to use the PROMIS tools. We're for our cancer center patients, just to really evaluate how they're doing and be able to track how they do throughout their treatment. And so I've been on the PROMIS website and on the assessment center, and we see the tools. I'm wondering, what we would love to do is have the instrument on a iPad, like you said, and we can download the app and just be able to use it for our own use on who needs to see a social worker or who should we pay most attention to that they have a need, and then provide services and see how they progress through their cancer center. Can somebody help me tell me what my next step should be, or do you want an offline call? I'm just confused.
No, I think we can pursue something offline, but I'd be happy to start with some suggestions, and Nan may chime in too. So the first question is whether you want to use computerized adaptive testing or not, and that on the one hand is a great tool because it allows you to have a more efficient assessment for patients. They don't have to answer as many questions. On the other hand, it does require, if you're going to use an iPad, it does require using the API. And so Maria, who I think is still on, can talk with you about getting the API. So that's the first question. If you're not going to use a CAT, and I also refer you to that Wagner paper in cancer, the Wagner et al. Paper in cancer, to read that and see what we did here at Northwestern. That's a model, and we do exactly what you're looking for. We use it as a screening approach. We identify the need for social work services, for mental health referral, talk to see a nurse about pain management. So it's used to direct care decisions. It's a clinical tool. It's not a, we do research on it, but it's really a clinical tool. So if you are going to be more wanting to use a perhaps more simplified static approach where you're asking the same set of questions and you want to be screening for things like pain and distress, I think I would point you to the PROMIS 29, which is 29 questions ask about pain, fatigue, physical function, depression, anxiety, sleep. And it's 4 questions each with a 0 to 10 pain score. It's 29 questions, takes about 5 minutes for patients to complete. And is available, it's one of the standard static forms, and you could deploy that fairly quickly, and then add some social work referral or other questions to it if you wanted. Maybe go up to more like 10 minutes for the patient when they come in for a visit. The other thing that we do that you may or may not want to or be able to do is we encourage people to complete this in the 1 to 3 days prior to coming into the clinic, so that it's actually been done and the report's been generated by the time they come in. And about 40% of people that we offer to do that take us up on it. The others, we catch them when they come in and then have them do it when they show up. Okay. So I would say CAT, you want to use the CATs or not, follow the Wagner paper. If you want to do something in a more static environment, same questions asked over time, I would say the PROMIS 29 should work. And you'll also meet your Commission on Cancer standards for distress and pain screening.
Great. Okay, and the Promise 29, to do that, and I'm sorry, I don't know more. Do I join is the health network something totally separate than that, or?
Promise Health, yeah, they're all separate. You can use anything we're talking about without joining anything. You're not obligated to join anything. The joining would be more to have an opportunity for continued learning, collaboration, networking, participation. These calls are free as opposed to a fee and that sort of thing. But you don't have to join Promise Health Organization. And as we said before, there's no such thing as joining Health Measures. That's just a website where you can go and download this.
Okay.
The tool from.
Okay. And then, I guess I kind of thought, and maybe you want to talk offline because I'm so elementary in my knowledge, but I thought maybe, we could feed our data to you all, or do you do that anymore? Or is that the Promise 29? So we would do it and it would...
We really encourage you to sort of house and manage your own data. If we did it, we're moving into we used to provide and for a very limited time still do provide sort of free online web-based assessment, but that's got to, just for practical purposes, we have to migrate that to a fee basis. And so we're providing these tools for people to use on their own without having to pay. But at the same time, if you wanted our help, we can do it, but it's not going to be free for long.
Yeah, that's
but that we can talk offline about. Yeah.
Okay, but if
we can do it, we can help you. But
Apple app on our iPad with the questions, download them there so they could use the app when they come in.
Yep, that you buy that through Apple. Maria has more detail on that, but you basically buy the app.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, I was going to say...
You can follow up with us. That's fine.
Yeah, so Nan wrote the link to a kind of a perfect summary page on Health Measures that has the links to all the options, and then, of course, you can follow up with me.
Okay, and I'm sorry, our computers just totally died, so we can't see anything anymore. Our links, I don't know why, in Southern Ohio, the Cancer Center, we can't back on.
So I would suggest going to healthmeasures.net, and there's a section on that site called How to Choose a Health Measure, or How to Choose a Promise Measure, and there's a section on applications of measures in clinical practice that has a great resource from ISAQOL. They wrote a white paper outlining how to do this. And then there's a page on data collection tools that will outline your various technology solutions for implementing a promise measure. There's also information on scoring and interpreting as well. So I would start there to get more information and then follow up with us.
On that page, and I've got it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, my friends, we've hit the top of the hour. We're going to start losing people. Dr. Fan, I see you have a follow-up question on manual scoring and pattern scoring. We'll repost that when we produce the summary. We don't have time to go into it now, but and then we can also follow up with you on email. Okay. So thank you, everyone, on behalf of Karen and Nan and Maria. Great talking to all of you.
Appreciate your questions, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.